Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second in a series of Business Insights. Today's guest speaker is Mr. G.J. Hart, so we thought it was fitting to come to you from the Hart School of Hospitality, Sport, and Recreation Management. And as many of you know, Mr. Hart and his wife Heather have been very generous to the Hart School, so much of the programming that takes place is a result of this generosity. In a few minutes, we will start the presentation, and I would encourage you to use the Q&A feature to list your questions. We will get to as many of those questions as time allows, and Mr. Hart will join us live for that Q&A session. So, I present to you Mr. G.J. Hart.
Hi there, I'm G.J. Hart. I am CEO of Torchy's Tacos. We have 85 restaurants in 7 states and growing very rapidly. Very pleased to be here with you today to discuss leading through the pandemic and the challenges, lessons learned, and how we have gotten through it. So my goal today is to share some of those things that we've learned as an organization from the pandemic, and arguably the most stressful, difficult, challenging time in certainly the restaurant industry that I can remember, and I've been doing it north of 30 years. It certainly hasn't been easy, and it's been one that we've learned a tremendous amount from. So let me just set the stage for you that start with the beginning of the year, in January 2020, there's a huge financial conference for consumer brands and restaurants in January, and we had decided that we would present to the financial community as an organization that's growing and one they may want to watch. And so in that presentation with over 2,000 folks, I talked about Torchy's and what we were doing with Torchy's and how we were going to move the organization forward. And we announced the 100-store growth plan on top of, at the time, 65 restaurants that we had. And it was a very exciting time. We actually had the opportunity to take and serve people our food, our margaritas, and everything we do is from scratch. And it was received incredibly well. And then 10 months into the year, we end up with the early signs of COVID, the pandemic, the shutting down of the country. So here's a business that had a promising growth strategy. We were very excited about where we were headed, and all of a sudden, we were faced with not only the biggest challenge in history, we were also just surviving for the company's future and our livelihoods, and all the people that we lead and we serve in our organization was at risk. All of a sudden, we were having to monitor in over 160 different government orders and challenges within all the municipalities we serve. We had a business that was 2/3 dine-in business, 1/3 off-premise, if you will, delivery and or takeaway. To all of a sudden, we had to go 100% off-premise and deal with a complete pivot of our business. So the scene was one of desperation in many ways in those early days. So what are the keys to resilience during that time? And I will tell you, the learning that I've had through this is to have quick, thoughtful action, make decisions, do something, even if it's wrong, have open communication, be transparent with your team, and then continue to focus on what is the vision coming through this. And so in our case, it was around, we wanted to be stronger coming out of COVID than we went into COVID as an organization. It became the rallying cry. And that is led by making sure that we communicate that the safety of our team members and our guests was of the first thing on our mind, and how we would go through this with that as consideration in everything that we do. So we wanted to face this adversity in a way that we could come out stronger, learn from it, and convince all of our team members that there was hope because they were scared, that there was a future because the uncertainty and the unknown. So it's, how do you navigate through that? So We did exactly that. And I will tell you, it starts with having the right people doing the right things at the right times, and being able to count on them to do what that was necessary to do. So I will also tell you that we have a unique come as you are, have a voice, understand how you matter, what your role means to the organization. We have a culture that's by design, not by default. So those things are important going into a crisis like this, so that people can rely on what you value as an organization, what you believe in, what the mission and vision of the company are, and that that will get you through this crisis. So in Torchy's case, we had those things. We live by the simple mission of to be damn good. Every restaurant has be damn good, and that's just because of when the company was young, and people would try our tacos for the first time. They said, "Man, this is damn good," and that became the overall rallying cry. The vision of the company is to serve people the best damn tacos we can, and our values are all around Torch, which is the acronym. Torch is around tenacity and originality, respect, community, and honor. And the takeaway from all of this is that was the guiding principles on our resiliency getting through the pandemic. So the first was to confront the brutal facts, to tell people, what are we really dealing with? What were the challenges that we were facing with this pandemic? And then the second thing is to take decisive action, to make decisions. So in our case at Torchy's, we made the decisions early on to go to limited hours. We made a decision to have a scaled back menu. We had our innovation folks come up with a family pack much earlier than others. We went out with margaritas to go. We're known for margaritas. We squeezed the limes for the margarita. And we had kits that people could buy. So we automatically pivoted. And then our team members, our restaurants were not set up for being able to have a drive-through. So we would create mock drive-throughs. To be able to have curbside pickup, we didn't have curbside. We had to get all those things very, very quickly, which we did. You had to be able to be a leader in the sense that you had to take your POS and bring it out to the outside of the restaurant from in the restaurant, run your own cable. There was no one to do all these things. And so our restaurant operators were able to do that so that they could be in business. I will tell you the other thing that's key here for us through the transparency, we have a program we call our managing partner program. So every single unit operator basically has skin in the game. Not basically, they do have skin in the game. They write us a check for the right to run a restaurant. It's what I call an internal franchise system. And it's one where they get a low base pay, but they get a percentage of the profits every single month. Well, that creates entrepreneurial spirit, buy-in, passion, the tenacity to get through anything, to make sure they're doing everything that's required, necessary to be successful. So they were the ones that were sharing their best practices, their learnings of what worked and what didn't work around this crisis. And then as we started to look at different markets, we had to close restaurants. We had to furlough north of 2,000 individuals. And when we furloughed those people, we did it in a way that we could continue to communicate with them, to let them know we cared and we were doing everything in our power to bring them back. We halted all of our development of new restaurants. So they were in different forms and different stages of operation, but set them up so that we could restart when it was appropriate the right way. And then we continued to communicate. I would get and communicate to all of our leadership and our team members every single day through the pandemic. And during those conversations and the dialogue would start off with something positive, celebrating a teammate, being able to have others share something good that they had seen, the littlest thing that you can rely on to make sure that we're celebrating even through this pandemic. And then at the end of the day, what that allows you to do is stay true to your core values. You continually think about what those mean and how can you apply them through this pandemic. And people would unify around this whole concept of being stronger coming out of COVID than we went into COVID. And we acknowledged that throughout. We would talk about it, and it was one that we stayed true to. So as a result of all of this, everyone had the same rallying cry. everyone realized that they truly mattered to the success of the organization and all that we had going on. And as we learned and pivoted from a business that was 2/3 dine-in, 1/3 off-premise to 100% off-premise, we learned to do that extremely well. And from those initial weeks of COVID and all those challenges of closed restaurants, week in and week out, we continued to improve our sales throughout the balance of 2020. We also, as a result of coming together, being quick, decisive, communication, executing all the protocols necessary, making sure we communicated that we were going to do everything and over and above what was required to keep our team members and our guests safe. We started to garner trust. People were comfortable and they wanted to have Torchy's to be a part of their lives in this very, very difficult time. We started to come through that. Our sales continued to grow. We started to reopen restaurants. We went back to the development of our restaurants. So as we went through COVID, we opened up 12 new restaurants. We brought back every team member that wanted to come back. We've since hired well over 1,000 new team members, and the company continued to move forward. It hasn't been easy. It's been a challenge beyond belief. But we've united around our rallying cry of being stronger coming out than we went going into COVID. And I'm really proud to say that the team came together in a way of a result of taking this crisis and trying to maximize the opportunity for our organization and for themselves so that we can grow and continue to be this growth company that we talked about in January of 2020 at that financial conference. And so I'm pleased to say that it's those core pieces and elements of our business, a culture that's built by design, not by default, which is another important characteristic here of how you fight through a pandemic or any major crisis. It's that you have that foundation, the belief system that people buy into, the understanding of what the mission and vision are, and how you can add to that, and how you can continue to develop and grow as a result of that. So as we go into 2021, as we continue to move through COVID, we are back on our development strategy and have taken those key learnings to be stronger as a result. And I'm real proud to say that we have done exactly that. And the company is in fact stronger than it was going into COVID. So it's one that don't want to necessarily relive, but a crisis can make you better. It can make you stronger, and that is in fact true. It takes courage to make the decision, to be decisive, to be transparent, to confront the brutal facts. But if you rely on the foundation you've built around a unique culture by design, not by default, then ultimately being a leader in that environment, people believe as a result of that, people follow, and people continue to thrive and develop as a result. So we feel as though while it's been super, super difficult, that we're a better organization today than we were at the beginning of 2020. So just some thoughts around how do you survive through a pandemic, or how do you survive through a major crisis? Again, it's about being transparent. It's being real, humble, communicating, over communicating, and relying on the individuals in the organization and the value system that you've created. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Hi, GJ. How are you?
Hey there. How are you?
Great. Thank you. That's a change of scenery there. Where are you today?
This is actually the baseball stadium in Houston, Texas.
Love that. So I want to thank you on behalf of everyone here in the College Business Hart School for a great presentation. And I just want to make sure before we get into the Q&A, if you have anything else to follow up with for the presentation, or if you're ready to roll.
No, there is just one comment I would make is at the beginning of my comments, I talked about 10 months into the year. It was 10 weeks into the year, so mid-March. So that's quite a bit of difference.
Well, very good. And I'm glad everything turned out. And it sounds like things actually, in spite of a pandemic, you learned a lot and your franchisees and all your leadership and employees learned a whole lot during this. One of the things that you talked about was this idea of giving your franchisees some skin in the game and some ability to help make decisions for the whole company. How do you balance that when all of a sudden you see a pandemic hitting you and you know that you need to be so quick with certain decision making? How do you keep that culture going, or how do you restore it when you pull out of the pandemic?
Well, first, they're not franchisees. They are employees of the company. So essentially, our managing partner program is such that they sign a contract that they will run a particular restaurant for a minimum of 3 years with a small base pay and a percentage of the operating profits every month. And as I said in the comments, it really creates this entrepreneurial spirit, the need that, hey, you know, every day matters, because if I don't make money, I'm not going to make money for my family. So that very concept is something that I believe helped us get through the pandemic much faster, much quicker, and it allowed us to move fast. And the reason that is while we're communicating each and every day, each particular restaurant group within the different states that we serve, they too were communicating on a daily basis, learning from best practices from one operator to the other, and doing the things that were necessary to drive sales again, because they don't drive sales, they don't make any money, and thus it doesn't work. Now, all the foundational work around our culture, our belief system, core values, that's something we constantly work on. But that foundation has been built over the last few years around those core values, and we continually remind folks what that means and what's the expectations, because essentially it's a decision-making process where, you know, you're tenacious or you're original, or there's honor, respect. Those are, again, the acronym of TORCH for our core values. So it's not something that you say, okay, let's go do this, let's build a culture and let's just move on to something else. It's constantly evolving through this process.
Thank you. And then thinking about some of the things that you learned during the global pandemic, maybe operation wise, are there any things that you plan to embrace and carry with you as things return to whatever our new normal is going to be?
Well, in our case, there are quite a few things. The operating hours for Torchy's historically had been from 7 in the morning until 9 at night during the week. And we had been testing in some new markets not to open till later in the day. And that was something we pivoted to very quickly during COVID, because you have to have management coverage, team members for all those hours that you're in operation. And if you're not driving enough sales during those off-peak times, then it's super expensive. And what we also did is, by building our digital presence and our online business, much of our breakfast type businesses is business orders or larger orders where people can call ahead. So what we learned from this is that we don't need to be open all those operating hours. So that's a major change. We also skinnied down our menu. Again, the less number of items when you're completely scratch base and everything's done that way, the less items that you have, the more repetition you have, the better execution you have. So we reduced our menu by a few tacos as well, and that makes it easier. And then things around how the restaurants operate in terms of the safety protocols and things like that, that, you know, much of which will stay in place beyond the pandemic. So that was some key learning as well. And then I will say that, again, when you have a very special group of people that have common beliefs, it's amazing what you can get done even in a terrible crisis like this.
Thank you. This is from one of your buddies from the board. You had a very successful capital raise during the pandemic. Can you discuss valuation considerations during such challenging times, and how have you navigated the transaction?
Yes, we did have a successful transaction towards the end of the year, and we were very, very pleased. the ability to achieve a successful offering like that was as a result of how we led through COVID and how the company performed coming through COVID, not just the existing restaurants, but the restaurants we opened up during the pandemic as well. I'll give you an example. In Kansas City, we opened up a very first restaurant in the market, new state for us, and you couldn't get in the place without a 2-hour wait for the first 2.5 weeks in the middle of a pandemic when people are having to keep their distance and all those other type of things. So just we had that success, which then certainly gave people the perspective that we would continue to succeed in our development strategies when we move forward. So that was super helpful. In terms of valuations, we were very happy with the valuation. I will tell you that the transaction was primarily secondary shares, not primary shares. So that makes it even more challenging to get a great valuation, but we were able to do it. We were significantly oversubscribed, and it's allowed us to be stronger from a financial perspective.
And then this one recognizes the fact that you've been very successful in leading many different organizations. So they're thinking back all the way to probably Texas Roadhouse or before, and then California Pizza Kitchen, and now Torchy's. Were there some skills that you learned while leading those organizations that helped you better navigate the pandemic with Torchy's?
I would say that be decisive, over communicate, role model behaviors that you expect others to be, because that's the way people will follow a leader, is if they believe in and trust that particular individual. So I think in all these companies, it's people first. People then create a unique culture that ultimately leads to the success of that business. It's like Jim Collins has said, it's first who, then what, and that's really right. It's building great teams and doing that in a very open and transparent way. I would say those are the key learnings.
This is a really interesting question as well. It says, since your restaurants are in so many different municipalities with varying COVID guidelines, what standards did Torchy's set to sort of be consistent across all these different locations and their guidelines?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we at one point I think we were monitoring 160 different rules, if you will, coming out and from everywhere. And the very simple thing is that we will deliver more than what is expected by whatever that municipality is. So in this particular case, all the protocols that were necessary for the pandemic, we would go over and above to what the guidelines would be. And that is the overriding issue for us, is to keep our team members safe and keep our guests safe.
Okay, and then here's another question. It's related to a prior question, but you talked about the mix of on-premise and off-premise. And so the question is, really to what degree has the pandemic changed your outlook for this off-premise sales? And then will that require any sort of architectural or design changes moving forward as you build new restaurants?
Sure, that's a great question. I will tell you that when I first came on at Torchy's, one of the things I felt very strongly about, given the consumer and what I felt like the consumer demands would be going forward, we had started on a mission that 50% of our business would be off-premise, 50% on-premise over time. I actually thought that would take 5 years. Didn't expect it to happen as quickly as it did when this pandemic hit. But the good news is we had already started thinking about that. So starting to make some structural changes, be willing to test things like pickup windows or drive-throughs or things that would be required to have 50% of your business be off-premise. Now, I'm not telling you that we were ready when in March this whole thing went crazy, but it certainly had people thinking differently. Now, roll forward through the pandemic today, we're doing a little over 50% of our business off-premise. And again, as I said, we don't have drive-throughs throughout all of our restaurants. We don't have pickup windows. We had not been used to having people coming to the restaurant with their cars, and all those things we had to change. So now what it's led to is that we're going to move faster to the designing of our restaurants to either have drive-throughs, pickup windows, continue to learn from those things so that we can be satisfying the consumer where they want it, when they want it. Curbside was another thing that is not, many of our restaurants were in strip centers where, in the pandemic, there was plenty of parking, but normally, and of course, there isn't necessarily a lot of parking close to the restaurant. So there's been all those things that have changed how we think about the requirements for where we will build a new restaurant. And then the last piece of that is we're looking to make our restaurants more efficient and potentially smaller than what we've done in the past. So that opens up more real estate opportunities for us.
Okay. This is kind of an interesting question as well. As we seek to move into recovery mode from COVID, what type of support would you like to see from the U.S. government for the restaurant industry?
Well, I think having a clear, concise set of protocols and requirements and guidelines would be a good start. That definitely has not been the case through COVID. So if we know what we're shooting for, we can adhere to those guidelines pretty easily. But if it continually changes, then I think that makes it even more difficult. And then the other challenge that I'd love to do is have the federal government and the state governments figure out who's really in charge and who makes the calls. And I think that has been one of the most challenging things, is that you don't really know exactly where all the rules and guidelines are coming from and which ones you should listen to, because they do vary and they are very, very different. So some standardization around that, clarity around it would be super helpful.
Okay, and I've got one more question, and this is the one that I think a lot of people are in the back of their minds are wondering. This one says, GJ, thanks for your time today. I am an 04 JMU grad who moved to the Austin, Texas area in 2006 and lived walking distance to the very first Torchy's. I've been a huge fan ever since and have been raving about Torchy's to my friends and family back east. What are your planned expansions? And of course, the end of that is, do you ever see yourself in Harrisonburg? I asked you the same thing about California Pizza Kitchen several years ago, so here you go.
Well, our real estate growth strategy is to grow out from our base of successful markets. And given the brand is very experiential, it's not driven by the classic marketing sense. It's more word of mouth, and you really have to experience it. So as we have grown, we've gone from Texas to Oklahoma, from over to Colorado, and now we're in Kansas and Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana. And so we continue to what I call mushroom out. For those on the call in Virginia, we are planning to open up restaurants in Virginia early next year, potentially one late this year. And we're getting fairly close. We're opening around Richmond. We're looking to open around Charlottesville, which I know is not too far from Harrisonburg. Harrisonburg will be a while. We have a lot of low-hanging fruit on markets that'll be better suited and with the right kind of demos and the right kind of density that's required for us. But I don't think we're going to be that far off where you can easily get to a Torchy's within the next couple of years. In terms of the Northern Virginia area, we're looking right now for real estate in that market as well. So we're coming to Virginia.
Great, that's excellent news. Thank you. So we just wanted to tell you thank you today. This was a wonderful presentation. We hope to see you on campus as soon as you are able and willing. I know you have a few reasons to be here on campus, so stop by and say hello when you can.
I absolutely will. Yep, absolutely. And thanks for having me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And to the audience, don't forget that next week we have our third in the series. Here is the information for you. So you can go ahead and click on the image, get the information. Next week, we welcome Joe Russo from Verizon. And we hope you all have a good week. Until next Tuesday, we'll see you around.